Hello, welcome to my channel. This is the third and final installment of my review of the Supernote Manta. The first video was covering kind of the unboxing, hardware impressions, and the setup process. The second video covered battery tests, and I went through a lot of other observations of some of the unique features of the Supernote, both good and bad, mostly positive. And in this video, we review the pros and cons of the device. I'm going to give my final recommendations around the device. I'm going to make the case for why the Supernote software is the most professionally oriented software of all the e-ink note-taking devices out there, and then we'll close it with some final thoughts. So let's jump right into the pros and cons. So we're going to begin looking at the primary pros of the Supernote Manta. And these are the things that are kind of the headliners, the reasons why you might want to consider purchasing the device. And we'll start with the headliner, which is class-leading note-taking app. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail later on in this video about more specifically what I mean, but the overall thing I want to convey here is that the Supernote software is the most professionally oriented note-taking application in the e-ink note-taking space. I think this stands alone in that regard. Again, I'll try to justify in a little more detail later why, but this is clearly the main reason, in my opinion, that you would consider purchasing the Supernote Manta. In addition to that, the document reader is really good as well. Now, you can make an argument that Books has the better document reader in the sense that it can handle more document types than the Supernote Manta, but the UI on the Manta is far superior to the UI on the Books reader, so there's a little bit of give and take there. But even in isolation, it's just a really good document reader. It handles PDFs and EPUBs really well, doc files as well, and those, of course, are the more common file formats out there. So it's a really strong reading app, and it's an asset for this particular device. Then you've got the replaceable battery, and this is something that will become a little more commonplace because of EU regulations that will kick into effect in a few years. But as of right now, Supernote is the only manufacturer that has a replaceable battery. That means that if you were to have battery issues, then in the future you could swap out the battery without having to buy a whole new device. In addition to that, the motherboard is swappable as well. We don't know what that's going to mean in the future, but the potential is that you could upgrade your Supernote with a new motherboard, again, instead of buying an entirely new device, and presumably that would be cheaper as a result. We don't know exactly how that will play out, but the potential is certainly there with this device. Finally, the performance overall is really snappy. Is it the snappiest device that I've ever used? No. But it's really solid, and I would argue that it's right there where it needs to be. You don't normally notice any sluggishness in going through the menus. It's definitely an upgrade from the A5X, which started to show a little bit of its age. That's certainly been resolved here. And while maybe it's not the snappiest device, it's certainly among the snappiest devices out there. That then takes us to the primary cons of the device, and these are certain aspects of the device that may lead you to pause purchasing the Manta and may have you look at alternatives in the marketplace. And the first among these is the limited app selection. Natively, there's only 2 applications that are available on the Supernote Manta. That's Kindle and their drawing app. You can sideload apps, although not all apps will sideload effectively, and there's obviously more effort involved in that process. Competitors, particularly Books, but others have the ability to connect to the Google Play Store, which you can't do, even in a sideloaded manner on the Supernote. So if you were looking to do apps on an e-ink device, then you would want to look elsewhere because the selection is quite limited. Having said that, as far as I can tell, most reading apps can be sideloaded just fine. So if you were just looking for, say, Barnes & Noble or Kobo, those have the potential to work well on this device, although I should say I haven't tested that personally. But presumably that should work. Another thing that you may want to consider is that it's more expensive. if you get the device plus the half folio plus the cheapest stylus available on Supernote, although you could purchase a stylus on Amazon for even cheaper, but if you just bought from the Supernote site, you're talking about $580 US, and compare that to, say, the Books Note Air 4C, which has a full folio, a cover, and a stylus for $500. And then beyond that, Books provides a couple black and white variants of their devices at even lower price points, going all the way down to $380. So there's no question that the Supernote is on the pricier side. The last thing I'll point out is there's no front lighting on the device. Now, how much this matters to you will absolutely vary depending on your situation. I can just tell you personally, in my experience, I've used the Supernote A5X at work for almost the past 3 years, and I've never felt the need for front lighting in those environments. I usually rely on lighting from the window. Occasionally, if it's dark outside, I might put on my office lights, but in either situation, I've always had more than adequate lighting for the device. The only time that front lighting becomes an issue for me is in reading. And again, if you have good lighting situation, it won't be a factor, but I tend to want to read in more comfortable environments where the lighting is not quite as good, and in those environments, I really need front lighting for my device, and the Supernote doesn't have that. So now we shift into what I call the secondary pros of the Supernote Manta, and these are aspects of the device that don't necessarily rise to things that would influence a purchasing decision, but there are things that I really liked about the device and I think are worth calling out. So we'll start off here with 300 ppi. That's as high of a resolution as we currently get with e-ink screens. So, and it is more common now among devices. It doesn't stand out like it used to, maybe say a year ago, but it's still really nice to have, and the screen looks very sharp as a result. Then you've got the ghosting. I've actually seen some posts on Reddit that talk about the fact that there's a bit of ghosting on the device, and some people even raise this as a concern, and that really surprised me because my experience with it is the ghosting's managed really well. You see very little ghosting on this device, and of course, if you do have ghosting that you want to try to remove, you just swipe on the right bar and that refreshes the screen. For those that may not know, ghosting is basically an after image on the screen that sometimes is present. But again, I think the Supernote actually manages this extremely well. It's one of the better devices in the black and white space around ghosting. As I talked about in the previous video in the battery tests, if you turn off all of the battery saving options on the device, which is how I generally do my battery tests, the Manta does not perform very well. Now, the thing about battery saving options is they usually come with a trade-off. So the biggest trade-off is when you have your power off option. And this trade-off, obviously is tremendously effective in saving battery power, but it comes at the cost of having to reboot the device every time you want to use it. And that can be 30 seconds or more. I think it was 35 seconds with the Manta. But the Supernote, and this is unique to this device because most devices have an auto sleep or have a power off function. The Supernote has this kind of no-load power saving feature, and this is basically something where you can select it, particularly for times when you have the screen on, and the trade-offs are very minimal. The worst case scenario is you may have to swipe or tap on the screen twice at certain times in order to activate that. But the battery savings that this provides is extraordinary. It takes it from being kind of at the lower end of devices to near the top in that type of situation. So it's a really impressive battery saving feature the device has, where the trade-off is really negligible, but the advantages are tremendous. So that's a definite positive call out there. The storage is expandable. I don't know how important this is. For some people, this is a huge deal. I think for most people, the storage on the device itself will be just fine. As an example, I've used my Supernote A5X for almost 3 years. I have over 200 notebooks on that device, and I only use 13 gigabytes of storage space, including whatever the system itself takes. So there was no way I was ever going to fill that up unless I'd use the device for another 5 to 10 years. So you're going to have plenty of storage, but if you're someone that uses a lot of documents, that may fill up the storage faster, and you do have the ability for expandability there. So that's a nice feature to have. The file transfer options on this device are many. You have the ability, of course, with the Supernote cloud services, but you can also use Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, and those can all be set to sync in bulk, by a touch of a button. In addition to that, you can always connect your device via a Wi-Fi network and transfer or view files that way. So just a lot of options here. So for example, if you had a PDF that you were annotating, there's a lot of options to then transfer that file over and then share it accordingly. It does have landscape mode, so again, going to PDFs, this is really nice because PDFs were not made for a 10-inch screen that compresses the image, and sometimes it's still legible even then, but other times you do really need to zoom in, and instead of having to zoom in, which you can do in portrait mode on the Manta, you can go to landscape mode, and that basically effectively breaks the page in half and makes it perfectly legible. And if you had an image, say, or a diagram in the middle of the screen, you can always just turn the device back, view it, and then go back to landscape mode. So very effective as it relates to reading PDFs. So that's a nice feature to have, and it's well executed. The left touch bar, and this was introduced, of course, as were a lot of the software features with the Supernote Nomad, but nevertheless remains a nice addition to this 10-inch device. It adds the ability not only to have two-finger erase, but two-finger lasso. Previous to that, on the A5X, you had to decide whether you'd use two fingers for erase or lasso based on your system settings, but having that bar allows you to basically have both. So it really does add to the functionality of the device, and that swipe bar also adds an undo and redo function as well. So it is a nice add and a definite upgrade over the A5X. The screen feel, the Feel Right to Film, this is really interesting. This was first introduced on the Supernote Nomad, and it was a different experience back then. So first off, you had to break the screen in. It had a lot of, it really wanted to hold on resistance to your pen strokes, and so you had to wear that down. I wore it down just by scribbling on the screen. Other people would post about using oils to wear it down, but it's something you definitely had to do. And even then, I always felt like there was just a little bit of grippiness to the screen that I would prefer wasn't there. That's not the case here with the Manta. First off, it's already pre-broken in for you, so you don't have any of that crazy resistance that we had with the Nomad. But even then, I actually really like the Feel Right screen as it's been implemented here, and I never felt that way with the Nomad. I always felt like it was okay, but not necessarily better than what I had on the A5X. Now, with this version of the Feel Right to Film, I actually think it is superior. I love the sound that comes off of it, and I think it actually is an improvement over what was on the A5X. The screen sharing, it's not uncommon for devices to have screen sharing. In fact, it's becoming more common than not now. But one thing that Supernote has that's different than anybody else, as far as I know, is the ability to hover your stylus just above the screen to show a pointer as you're sharing it. And I showed a demo of this in the previous video. But what's cool about this is that you can not only share your notes using screen sharing, but you can also highlight things where you want people to look using this pointer as a guide. It really adds to the functionality of screen sharing, and it really amazes me that other companies haven't adopted this. But for now, it's just in the purview of the Supernote. So now we finish with our secondary cons, and these are things that kind of, I think, could have been better, but I wouldn't use these as reasons not to buy the device. They're just things that, I found a little annoying, and I just wanted to kind of walk through those. The first is the Bluetooth keyboard. As I demoed in the previous video, it's a little bit choppy. It could definitely be better. The Nomad is much better with a Bluetooth keyboard, so there is hope that there'll be a software fix for that on this device, but definitely right now it's serviceable, but it's not a great experience, and it can be better. The half folio, of course, is a little bit controversial. It was included to reduce the weight of the device, which of course it does effectively. But in doing so, it does leave the back of the device exposed, which could get dirty and potentially be a little bit scuffed over time. I'm not sure this is a huge issue. Again, that's why I placed it on the secondary list. And I do think the back's probably going to be fairly easy to clean. So the question then is, how scuffed will the back get as a result of not having that protection? And of course, ultimately, does anybody really care? It is the back of the device after all. So a very minor point, but still, a half folio does leave the back of the device exposed, at least in transit. When you're using the device, it will cover the back. So it's a thing, but not a huge thing. No color. Now, some people may call this a benefit because color in the e-ink world is a bit of an attribute that's still being developed and worked on and refined. So there's definitely drawbacks to color, but there's still a lot of positives to it as well. And this device, of course, is black and white. So if you were looking for a color device, you're not going to have it here. You can take that for what you will. There's no speakers as well. In fact, I'm not even clear that you can connect Bluetooth devices as speakers if you were to sideload an app that uses audio. So that's something to consider with this device. The pen loop. This is the one hardware feature that I think really is a detraction. And the issue isn't that the pen loop is connected to the device itself. I think that's actually fine. I think the issue is that the pen loop is made of this fabric, which is meant to flex. So the flexing of the fabric should be a positive thing, and that it should handle different sizes of styli. But the result of that is that the stylus, in this case I'm using the Heart of Metal 2 pen, goes limp on the device. And you can see the difference here in this excerpt, where you've got the original A5X and that stiff leather, and it's holding the stylus almost perfectly straight. And then you can see the contrast to that with the new Supernote Manta, where it's kind of drooping and doesn't really give you that premium feel in this loop. It's certainly functional. It's not a functionality problem, but it certainly takes what otherwise is a pretty premium device and kind of belies that a little bit visually. The power indicator is on the front of the device. I like to have it near where the device is connected to the USB-C port that's powering it. And the reason why is oftentimes I'm charging devices with the cover on. So you can just look at a glance and see whether it's been charged or not by the power indicator. But that's not the case here. You have to open up the cover to see the power indicator. So I think that could have been done a little bit better. The power button's recessed and it's functional, but I do find when I'm reaching over the device and pressing the power button, I did have difficulty in really getting that power button to depress. Now, if I had approached from the top, it wouldn't have been an issue, but it's strange to have that kind of issue on a device. And I think it's all designed to help prevent accidental touches of the power button, but I've seen other people do recessed power buttons a little bit better. This one was a little bit awkward for me. Again, not a huge issue, but something worth calling out. And the final thing is I did have situations where touch input would occasionally freeze on the device. Now, a lot of times in reviewing devices, I'll end up having a 1 or 2 time issue, and I usually just forget about it and not worry about it because that just kind of happens, and then usually the system updates, or maybe it was just a quirky thing that happened. But this happened a little bit more often than 1 or 2 times. It didn't happen frequently, but it happened enough that I wanted to call that out. Now, the reason why this is a secondary issue and not a primary issue is I didn't have to restart the device in order to get out of that state. If I just took the stylus and wrote on it, then everything would return to normal. So it's an easy fix. It doesn't involve a significant, rebooting of the system. So it is a minor glitch, but it's definitely something that you might end up experiencing from time to time. So overall, would I recommend the Supernote Manta? Absolutely, I would recommend it, particularly if you're looking for a note-taking device with an e-ink screen. This, I think, is the premier device to get out there. To put this in a little bit of context, as I kind of alluded to earlier in the video, I've been using the predecessor of this device, the Supernote A5X for almost 3 years now. And I'm looking to the Manta as an upgrade to that device, and it's definitely checking those boxes. So do I also recommend it for other people to upgrade? I think it's worth considering. It's not essential. The Supernote A5X remains a solid device, but you do get a little more functionality with the Manta, and it's a little bit snappier. So if that's of interest for you, then I would recommend updating your device. The only folks that maybe this isn't the right device for are people looking, for a less expensive device, or maybe they're looking more into apps or color, as I talked about in the pros and cons section. But for note-taking and even for document viewing and annotations, I think the Supernote is really the best in its class. And I did rankings recently regarding my top devices of 2024. And if this device had been reviewed back then, I would have put it at number 1 on the list. That's how I feel about the Manta. I think it's an amazing device. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it's a solid device, and I intend to use mine as my daily driver for the next few years to come. There's a reason why I think the Supernote competes most closely with books, and that a company like Viwoods, which I like a lot, and I really like their device, I don't think ultimately competes with the Supernote. And it basically comes down to reference features. So both books and Supernote have their own series of reference features, which are really far and away from anything else anybody else is doing. And that's worth calling out. So we'll focus on the reference features, of course, specific to the Supernote. And there is a plethora of them. So the first one is the star marking system. And this is basically while you're in the notes, and you can actually do this in other document types as well. You can just draw a star like so, and it converts. Now, that conversion is critical because it's the system telling you we recognize this as a star. Now, going forward, you can not only look up stars within a notebook. In fact, we'll click on this little table of contents icon, and if you go to stars, there it is. That'll take us right there. But in addition to that, you can actually search on stars across all notebooks. So if I swipe down, if I go into the search icon, then I can click, instead of file, I can look for star. And then this would, if I click the search icon, all my stars would come up, and I can click to get into that link. So a really powerful tool that's unique to the Supernote. Books has icons that you can search on, but those only exist within a notebook. The star marking system, again, allows search across notebooks. That's a key difference. In addition to that, if I wanted to get rid of this star and not have it reference anymore, I simply need to delete it, so like so, and now it's gone. So it's a very powerful reference tool. And in this case, I think pretty much unique to Supernote. Keywords is another thing that actually Books has an equivalent called tags, and they're pretty close to each other in terms of functionality. But this is not to confuse one with tags as it's talked about in Viwoods or in Remarkable, where the tag itself is specific to the page only. In this case, Books tags or Supernote keywords are specific to whatever you designate it to be. So let's right here is a keyword. So I can go ahead and lasso this accordingly, and I'll click on this little K button. It'll recognize the text. I can add that as a keyword. And then you can then search on these keywords, again, both inside the notebook and also across notebooks. So pretty powerful. We can also use the same keyword going forward. In addition to that, you do have handwriting search. Another option is headers. Now, headers exist only inside a particular notebook, so you can't look at headers across notebooks. But if I go ahead and lasso, we'll lasso this item here. Excellent. We click on the H. Then this menu comes up, and these are just formatting. So I'll go ahead and click this. Great. And so now, if I click on this little table of contents icon, like so, now there is the header right there. And it brings an image, essentially, of what I selected. So you can actually do drawings and create those as headers as well. In fact, let's go ahead and do that just for fun. Whoops. There we go. And we'll go header. We'll make it a little lighter this time. And now if I go into the table of contents, see, there it is. So pretty cool. Of course, I can get rid of these by deleting them like so. And then finally, you do have the ability to do links. So if we'll go ahead and circle this, and you'll see there's a link functionality here. And there's a number of things. This is basically, again, just showing the formatting of what the link is, but you can link to another page in the document. So you can have links within a document. You can have links to different files, either recent or other, or you can have links to web pages. Books rather, may have a slightly larger selection of links, but both I think are very powerful in their implementation. And again, these two companies are the only ones that have this really rich system of referencing notes that I think sets them apart in the marketplace. So in this demonstration, I did make an error in that for the handwriting search functionality, I wrote this down here and I couldn't find it. And what I forgot is this is a much older notebook. You see I'm on page 67, and this is not created as a handwriting recognition notebook. It's what's called a standard notebook. So now, since Supernote has changed their software, you have the ability to choose one or the other. Because this is not a handwriting notebook, and you can tell looking, you've got layers here, and you don't have layers in a handwriting notebook, it wasn't able to find that. But let's go ahead and open up a document that is set up as a handwriting notebook, this test demo. And so I've written Ola there again, and you can search on it in a couple ways. Within the notebook, I can click on this A icon, and then there it is. Or I can then do a search across all handwriting recognition ones by clicking on that magnifying glass. You can see it's there. I'm going to go ahead and search. And it is looking across all the notebooks that I have handwriting recognition. One point while it's doing that, oh, there's the result. Handwriting recognition notebooks do drain battery a little bit more than regular ones. I have not found that to be a hugely significant difference, but there is a little more battery drain associated with that. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and then it's taking me back to the writing. So that is, again, another reference tool that really sets this apart, as well as books. Books also has handwriting recognition. I think that the books one, though, is quite a bit slower than the Supernote version. So Supernote does do a little bit better job, I think, but both have that functionality. So if references are the things that sets both books and Supernote apart from the rest of the industry, then flow is the thing that sets Supernote apart from books. It's this kind of concept that's kind of hard to explain, but I'm going to try to do it through 5 particular examples that I think kind of illustrate this idea that as you're taking notes, you can execute these functions seamlessly on the Supernote, where on books devices, you can do the same things that we're talking about here for the most part, but it takes additional steps to do that. That's the idea of flow, the fact that you're in the process of writing and suddenly you want to erase something or you want to perform some sort of action. You can do it super quickly without, taking too much time away from what it is that you're trying to do. So our first example will be the 2-finger erase. And this is simply, I'm going to take my 2 fingers, I'm going to put it on the bar here, and then with the stylus, I'm going to delete. This is super critical as I'm going through meeting notes, for example, and I'm recording meeting things furiously, and I see an error or something I need to correct, and I want to delete it. I can quickly do that without disrupting my flow that much because I'm just using the stylus and my offhand in order to delete whatever I need to delete. On a similar fashion, you have the 2-finger lasso. So instead of putting the 2 fingers here, I'm going to put them on the screen and then circle. And then I have a number of features available to me, like I could delete, which is a little bit similar to the two-finger erase there. I can create a link, I can do a to-do or connect it to my calendar. I can create a keyword or a header, whatever reference tool I want to do, cut, copy, and paste. All that's available. I can, of course, move this around as you can with any lasso tool fairly easily. Now, Books does have a similar feature to this, which is the lasso recognition, but I think this is just as good. And Books certainly doesn't have the two-finger erase. I will point out that I have it set to do the erase here and the lasso here, but in the settings you can actually reverse that, where this is the lasso and this is the erase. That's just down to preference. Now, in referencing, we talked about the star marking system, so I won't go too deeply into that, but the point I just want to make here is, as I'm going through and making notes, look how quickly I can create a star and move on. That's what I mean by flow. It's the ability, now I've got this thing marked, it's going to be a to-do, which I can search on later, and it took me just a second without having to select any of the menu items or do anything particular. That's the part of flow. Quick links is incredible. So if I'm moving between documents, I just can swipe down no matter where I'm at. And then my most common documents are listed here and are accessible. Let me refresh the screen to get rid of that shading. There we go. So having quick access here is super unique. And again, it doesn't matter where you are in the device. These documents are available. Again, great for flow. If I have to switch to my to-do lists that I keep, I can switch to that. I can then come back to this file. How? Well, there's actually a couple ways of doing that, but one way is to go into recent files, which lists, I think it's the last 8 documents that you've entered, and you can quickly click on something and go back. Again, a great example of flow. These are all little things, but combined in the course of taking notes, particularly in a professional environment, you notice that all these things I did, I never once touched this menu bar. And so everything was really easy to get to, really quick to get to, really efficient, and in the flow of the work that I'm doing at that time. If you're taking notes, say creatively, things like flow aren't as critical of a concept necessarily, although they might be, depending on your thought process, of course. But in meeting notes in particular, this is super critical. And this is really the reason why I say that the Supernote software is the most professionally oriented software. It's because of this concept of flow and working with, as well as it can into my workflow and my daily work, particularly going into meetings and taking notes there. I don't think there's any device that does nearly as well as the Supernote. As great as the Books is, I really like the Books devices, but this concept of flow and these tools, and there are others, I'm just using these as the more permanent or salient examples, but there are more I could point to, are all things that really set this device apart as a professional tool. So we've reached the end of the video, and I think it's pretty clear. I feel quite favorable toward the Supernote Manta, and this is something born out of my personal experience of using Supernotes in the past, my review of this device, and my review of other devices as well. And I'll just say it again one last time. I think for note-taking, there's no question this is the premier device to use, and it justifies that extra expense. The one thing I do want to comment on is that over the course of this past year, I have had various levels of criticism for various organizations. BigMe comes to mind, but RADA as well, the makers of the Supernote. And I had a fairly critical video that I did in the middle of 2024. And I stand by that criticism. But I want to make sure that people understand that just because I'm critical about certain aspects of how companies are executing either their marketing or their products does not equate to any type of animosity toward the companies themselves. In fact, even the case with BigMe, who I probably was the most critical of in this past year, I still believe, as I do with all companies, that I have a tremendous respect for the software engineers, the marketing folks, the hardware engineers of those companies. My criticism is really coming down to how they're actually executing certain aspects of their device, not to the people or the organizations themselves. So I go in with that inherent respect for every organization that is entering the space. My criticism is being reserved for, did they actually deliver relative to the marketplace? And so I think there's a thing that sometimes viewers have where they take that criticism and they expand it and make it bigger than it is. And that's not the case. I only criticize things that I feel are notable, that I think are worth discussing. I don't attempt to nitpick. Maybe people sometimes view that as nitpicking. That's certainly your prerogative to do so, but that's not my intention. And I just wanted to make that clear that when I do give criticism, it's meant to be poignant, and it's meant to be hopefully a teaching moment for organizations or for individuals looking for these devices to understand where these companies can do better. And hopefully that's an impetus for them to do better. I can just say on a personal basis that I make mistakes all the time. And just because a company makes mistakes is not a scarlet letter for that company for the rest of eternity. RADA made some mistakes this year. There's no question about it. And hopefully that's an opportunity for them to be better going forward next year. But it doesn't paint the company with this broad stroke. As we can see here with this review of the Manta, none of that criticism that I had earlier in the year affected my review at all, and nor should it. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions about that, please pop those in the comments. Same for the review in general. This concludes my review of the Supernote Manta. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative. Until I see you next time, have a great day.